I'm not a city girl. I like the small town, but Mead is better than any small town I've ever lived in. It is a true family community.
Mead, Nebraska is a close-knit community in Saunders County, the kind of place where neighbors look out for neighbors.
People, they kind of have your back. As of any small town, everybody knows what you're doing, when you're doing it, sometimes before you're doing it. But it's a good little town.
Surrounded by corn and soybean fields, co-ops, and a cattle feedlot, agriculture is the village's lifeblood.
I've never seen a town come together like this town does and support people that need help. It's just an awesome place.
In 2015, an ethanol plant reopened south of the town of fewer than 600 people, promising to bring dozens of jobs and a boost to the local economy. But what Alten brought to the community instead was an environmental disaster and potential human health crisis.
It used to be just covered in butterflies, and see very few of those the last couple of years. This is the first year we've seen actually any amount of bumblebees on them.
Charlie McAvoy picked up beekeeping as a hobby in 2014, and his colonies immediately flourished at his farm east of Mead. But after 2 successful years, something changed. Almost overnight, bees began piling up dead outside of his hives. Neighbors attributed the deaths to a recent spraying for Japanese beetles, but the losses continue to happen year after year.
Then last year was really the kicker. I lost everything in June. That was before I do any spraying for any of that stuff.
At the same time McAvoy noticed the losses in his bee colonies, a nauseating odor was settling over the countryside.
We've always smelled the feedlot. You're used to that living on the country and that. But this was a whole different smell. I mean, it was a gut-wrenching smell.
You couldn't hang your clothes out, you couldn't open your windows. It was hard to go out and do yard work. You just did not want to be outside.
Jody Weibel has lived in Mead since 1986.
Your eyes would water, your throat would burn, sneeze, cough, people got bloody noses, and it just was progressively worse. It wasn't better.
Weibel said she got sick in 2018 and has never really recovered. Her neighbors have suffered from respiratory and digestive issues. McAvoy developed sores in his mouth. His doctors were puzzled.
I had the wife take me to the ER one night. I thought I had a kidney stone moving. That's what it felt like, was real intense pain. And they did a CAT scan and they said there's no kidney stone there, but I had a infection in the fatty tissue between my intestine and my stomach, which they said is a very rare infection to get. I did a follow-up with my regular doctor, and she made the comment, she's got to be something environmental with you, because she told me I was getting too young to be getting these kind of infections.
Residents point to Alt-N, the ethanol plant 1 mile south of Mead, as the origin of the changes in their environment and their health. Unlike the vast majority of ethanol plants in Nebraska and across the country, Alt-N used seeds coated in pesticides to produce biofuel, not harvested corn. The plant became the final destination for 98% of all of the unplanted treated seed in North America. Companies like Bayer, Syngenta, and Corteva, and even smaller regional seed dealers, used Alt-N as an inexpensive way to get rid of their expired product. All of that was unknown to the people of Mead, who assumed Alt-N was like a previous ethanol plant that operated at the same location. Weibel was on the Village Planning Commission that granted E3 Biofuels a permit in 2005.
I remember that they came in and they said it was going to be a self-sustaining entity. They were going to use the methane gas from the cow manure that was right next to them, and that's how they would power the ethanol plant. They would buy the corn from the local farmers and give them help, and then the leftover mash could be fed right back to the cattle, and it would be a closed loop. And I thought that was a wonderful idea.
I had sat in a meeting when Alt-N was there, and I will tell you, they made it sound pretty good.
Bill Thorson, who would later become chair of the village board, said opening an ethanol plant was a big deal for Mead.
We thought it was great. It was bringing us jobs and helping our farmers that are already here. You know, who wouldn't want that in their community?
E3 Biofuels' life was short. A boiler explosion forced the plant to close in 2007, and the company went into bankruptcy. E3's president, Kansas businessman Dennis Langley, soon formed a new company that would take over the plant. The new venture, Alt-N, was different. Langley told investors Alt-N would remove the pesticide coating on seeds through the ethanol manufacturing process, something Weibel said the village was unaware of when it granted Alt-N permission to start operating.
I thought it was going to be the exact same thing. We just went on face value.
Alt-N was unable to remove the chemical coating from the seeds and instead created solid and liquid byproducts saturated with pesticides, a fact that went undiscovered for years. In 2017, the Nebraska Department of Agriculture granted the ethanol company a permit to sell the solid byproduct, known as wet cake, to area farmers as compost. It quickly sold and delivered 33,000 tons of wet cake. In February 2018, Alt-N delivered a load of wet cake to a field next to Keat and Paula Dias' home north of Mead.
They actually spread it in the middle of the night. So at 2-3 a.m. in the morning, I had like tractor lights shining in my bedroom window. And I woke up on my birthday to this horrendous smell permeating the entire house.
Soon after, one of Dias' 3 dogs fell sick. Dias thought her Labrador had overeaten, but it quickly became apparent something more severe had happened.
He was kind of stumbling, staggering. His pupils were dilated, and so I took him to the vet, and of course at that point in time we had no idea what was wrong with him.
The Labrador recovered, but days later, Dias caught her German Shepherd eating some of the wet cake.
And then within a matter of 2 to 3 hours, she was visibly ill and had the same symptoms as our older dog that first got sick. So we immediately made a correlation between what they were being exposed to. And at that point in time, we'd already been here for 8 years. Our dogs had never gotten sick by having access to anything on our property ever before.
A neighbor mentioned to Dias that Alt-N used pesticide-treated seeds to make ethanol. A senior research scientist at a pharmaceutical company, Dias started digging into the issue herself.
Chemicals don't disappear, they go somewhere. So I thought, it's like, well, surely if this is a common process, there will be some article written somewhere to determine that the chemicals were somehow being transformed in a way that was non-harmful. I didn't know. I started looking in the scientific literature, and I just kept coming up with zero.
Dias called Alt-N to ask if any pesticides were present in the wet cake. A manager at the plant suggested residual ethanol and not pesticides had likely made the dogs sick. She remained skeptical. Gathering a sample of wet cake, Dias mailed it to a lab at Iowa State University, which found 7 different fungicides and insecticides commonly used in seed treatments.
And the veterinarian from Iowa State who did the diagnostic testing said that any or a combination of all of those things could have been causing the symptoms that we're seeing in our dogs.
Dias shared her findings with the Nebraska Department of Agriculture, but because her results did not show the concentrations of the pesticides present in the sample, the Ag Department declined her request to share the cost of further testing.
And the fact that nobody in the State Department thought it would be a good idea to at least request that kind of testing before me is shocking.
The next year, Dias' neighbor found several dead and dying raccoons near another pile of wet cake dumped in a cornfield close to her home. 2 years later, nothing grows where the wet cake was delivered. The Ag Department took a sample from the pile and found 6 of the 7 chemicals identified in Dias' results a year before. The analysis also detected clothianidin, a widely used seed treatment at a concentration exceeding 7,200 parts per billion, nearly a dozen times higher than the level deemed safe for drinking water by the Environmental Protection Agency. Another sample taken directly from Alt-N showed concentrations of clothianidin in the wet cake at a staggering 427,000 parts per billion, a level 85 times higher than the maximum recommended by the seed bag label.
They even found additional chemicals that I had not picked up in the test that we did at Iowa State, and they actually got concentrations and found them to be alarmingly high, high enough that you would expect some potential impact on the wildlife.
South of Alt-N, Judy Wu Smart, an assistant professor of entomology at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, was also trying to determine what was causing colonies of bees to collapse at the Eastern Nebraska Research and Extension Center.
We saw them chronically struggling with losses and high losses throughout the season. And then paired with the vegetation sampling and pesticide testing from the other research, we realized that there was something associated with the site itself.
Milkweed samples showed what WooSmart said were almost unbelievable levels of pesticides, with concentrations of clothianidin reaching 5,700 parts per billion, hundreds of times higher than the levels known to affect honeybees.
And so when we went back to look at the data, after a couple years of going through and resampling, we discovered that a lot of these were associated with the waterways.
WooSmart reached out to the State Ag Department and the EPA for help, but ran into a roadblock. The EPA governs the registration, sale, and application of thousands of chemicals through the Federal Insecticide, Rodenticide, and Fungicide Act, but the EPA doesn't regulate items after a pesticide has been applied, something known as the Treated Article Exemption.
Basically, that means that the regulations that occur happen when the product is placed on the seed, but after the seed comes and leaves the company, it's no longer regulated as a pesticide.
To further complicate matters, using treated seed in ethanol production was perfectly legal. Seed bag labels say treated seed can be used in ethanol production as long as the byproducts are not fed to livestock or used on crops. But it's unclear which federal or state agency is responsible for enforcement.
The challenges come for state and local officials on how to properly contain and classify this product. Is it a hazardous material? If so, when does it become a hazardous material? And how do we contain it so it doesn't leach into the environment?
Weibel saw the confusion firsthand when she met with the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy in the spring of 2019.
It was a good meeting. It was a good meeting, and I thought things are going to change, but they said flat out they didn't know what to do. It was a gray area. It wasn't covered in black and white anywhere.
In an email to the EPA, Nebraska's pesticide program manager sounded the alarm. If USDA and EPA are unwilling to enforce that label provision under the Federal Seed Act, we may have an issue where the ethanol company can operate with impunity. For many in Mead, impunity was already a reality. At its peak, Alt-N was processing as much as 900,000 pounds of treated seed into ethanol every day.
I just think that they just didn't care. I think that they saw a way to make a fast buck because they got a fuel source for free. And it was a waste product for everybody else but them. And so they saw an opportunity to profit.
Nebraska state agencies were unable to stop Alt-N from using treated seed to produce ethanol, but the state ag department was able to cancel the company's permit to sell the wet cake to farmers. In the meantime, the Department of Environment and Energy began issuing Alt-N violation notices for failing to properly dispose of its wet cake, maintain its lagoon system, or control stormwater runoff. But the agency's approach translated into what many in Mead felt was indifference by the state.
I felt like they were kind of pushing us aside, and I'm due to the fact you got a small town complaining about an odor or things like that, and I'm sure that nobody really had the time or wanted to investigate to see if there really was something going on.
I know that I'm not anybody, but I feel like we are just collateral damage.
Weibel said the issue escaped broader attention because it was difficult to explain why Alt-N was an outlier in the ethanol industry.
I think that a lot of people do not understand the pesticide issue. They go, well, ethanol plants are good, and ethanol plants are good, but this one isn't because it's not normal.
After Weibel learned state regulators' hands were tied, she went to Alt-N and spoke with General Manager Scott Tingelhoff directly about her concerns. Weibel said he told her the state had found nothing wrong during its inspections, a contradiction of what she had just heard from state officials. Alt-N did not respond to the Journal-Star's request for an interview.
I don't like to be lied to, and to look me right in the eye and treat me like I have stupid written on my forehead annoyed me.
Weibel redoubled her efforts to organize the community in an effort to push the state to act. Then, in early 2021, the issue finally gained traction. An article in The Guardian highlighted the potential dangers created by Alt-N's practices. Other media outlets followed, and a few weeks later, the Department of Environment and Energy forced the ethanol company to shut down. On March 1st, the state sued Alten, alleging 18 violations of Nebraska's environmental regulations. The lawsuit, which remains open in Saunders County District Court, seeks fines of $10,000 per day for each violation.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 50th day of the 107th.
After the plant shut down, the Nebraska legislature passed a law making Alten's method for manufacturing ethanol illegal in the state. In June, seed companies that once disposed of their treated seed at Alten pledged to start cleaning up the site. After being ignored for so long, residents of Mead are mixed on the rapid developments.
And I feel that that's probably, they have a little guilt on their side there because I can't see them spending this kind of money otherwise. But I think they were also lied to by Alten. Alten told them they could do it clean, effective, they could do X amount of bushel per day. None of it was true from what I hear.
Alten should be responsible, 100%. I'm delighted that the seed corns are stepping in, the seed corn companies, but Alten should be responsible.
Do you think that they'll be held responsible?
No.
Why not?
I think that they'll probably declare bankruptcy and just walk away free and clear. They've done nothing to be a good neighbor. Mr. Tinkelhoff says, oh, we're good neighbors. They've done nothing to be a good neighbor.
It's hard to have any trust in anything right now. You've seen how far this has gotten, and nobody's done nothing. And it's hard to get anybody to do anything now with it. So there's not a whole lot of trust of anybody with these companies and the government and everybody involved. It's like they're just dragging their feet hoping it goes away.
You know, I think a lot of people oversimplify the problem. They go, well, it's treated seed and we put that in the ground, right? And so all of those chemicals are already going in the ground, so what can be the harm? And I'm like, yeah, but the problem there is that how many tons of corn, you know, you're concentrating this stuff. And that's really what's happened, is that they wound up concentrating it to the point where now you have very harmful levels of these chemicals.
The University of Nebraska-Lincoln, along with the University of Nebraska Medical Center and Creighton University, has launched an ambitious research project to study how pesticides have moved from Alt-N through the environment. Samples are being taken from water and soil to look for the presence of pesticides, while researchers are also studying birds, frogs, and other wildlife. Woosmart is part of the team studying what she calls systemic pesticide pollution, deploying beehives as a proverbial canary in the coal mine.
We're going to continue to put bees on outside of the property where community members have experienced impacts. We're also going to continue to monitor on site on the NREC property. And we suspect that there's going to be a need for long-term monitoring, not just for the bees' health, but the environmental condition.
But the biggest concern among residents of Mead remains the impact on human health.
A lot tonight about the bees and the environment, and that, you know what, that's important. But I think everybody in this room is important. And I know a lot of people in this area that are having health issues, and we're hearing nothing about it. But we need to do something for our neighbors and our families. Thank you.
The University of Nebraska Medical Center is planning a 10-year voluntary health screening program for Mead residents, which means it could be years before any conclusions can be drawn. In the meantime, some residents say they want to use their experience with Alt-N as a warning to keep other communities from suffering a similar fate.
And if we don't, it could wind up repeating itself. It won't be hopefully in Nebraska, but it could be in Iowa. It could be, in South Dakota. Who knows?
Thorson said the community has learned from its experience with Alt-N and is now working to shake the reputation of being associated with the plant.
I know a couple of people that tried to sell their home here, and the sales fell through because they heard about the ethanol plant, and that's kind of the stigma we're trying to get rid of. I mean, if we want to get development here, if I want somebody to come in and build homes here, or people to buy homes here, they have to know that we have clean water. We're working hard to keep our clean water.
In the spring, Weibel celebrated the wedding of her daughter at the Mead Covenant Church, a little more than a mile north of Alt-N. Weibel said the day was perfect, even if the smell from the ethanol plant was in the air. It was the constant reminder of the fight Weibel and others have thrown themselves into for years to save the community where they have put down roots and where neighbors look out for neighbors.
This is my home. I will not be pushed out of my home.